want to share with you, so this is going to be a talk in 3 parts, and I'm going to try and keep it short, but I'm really excited to share with you all. And so the first part is just going to be kind of setting a little bit of perspective. Second part will be my testimony, and the third part will I'm going to share with you what we got to do on this last mission. But the bottom line is that I shouldn't be here. Like, this opportunity to talk with you from the perspective of an astronaut, I shouldn't be here. I should not have had the opportunity to join the astronaut office. I should not have gotten to fly in space. I shouldn't be here sharing this with you. Like, I should be sitting in the audience, if anything. And so I am grateful for this opportunity to share with you. I'm eager to share that perspective with you. And so really that's what this presentation is about, is perspective. Eternal perspective, the kingdom perspective, and setting that perspective with the Word. And so from 2 Corinthians, as we look not to the things that are seen, but the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. And so how difficult is it for us to think about the eternal, to look to the things that are unseen when our experience is this. It is the reality that we can perceive. And we have limited perception. We can see certain bands of visible wavelengths of light. We can hear certain wavelengths of sound. We can feel only what our bodies allow us to feel. We are limited beings. We are an amazing creation, but we are limited in what we are able to experience. There's a whole additional layers of world out there that we can't see from a physical standpoint, and then even more important layers in the spiritual realm that we cannot see, physically experience, but we know that are there. And so I want to share with you a little bit of trying to perceive those important eternal things. What we perceive, our perspectives are focused or warped by the lenses that we use. And those lenses are based on our experiences, the people around us, the context, all of those things. This is a selfie that I took at the very end of my second spacewalk back in 2015. And you can see that reflected in my helmet is the camera, and it's a warped view, but from inside that helmet looking out, it is one of the most brain-shattering experiences to see the outside of the space station and to see the Earth occupy your entire field of view. So that is one perspective. A second perspective is determined by proximity. We've got great views up close, and we lose detail as we move further away. So this is me during our second spacewalk. I'm working on ammonia jumper cables. And so I want to share with you a little bit of perspective of context, the space station itself. So you can see me, I'm wearing red stripes. I had the opportunity to lead this particular spacewalk. And as we pull back a little bit, this is my crewmate, Kimia. All these pictures are taken either by me or by my crewmates, but so Kimio is inside the Japanese experiment module taking pictures. This is out on the port, so the left side of the space station. And so you can see that I'm working on the truss here. And if we pull back a little bit further, I'm right, I don't know if you can see.
Yeah, I can see it.
Right there?
Yeah.
Let's pull back a little bit further.
Oh, wow.
So now you get a sense of the scale of one small person in the grand scheme of the International Space Station, much less creation. But that gives me the heebie-jeebies a little bit because my world in that spacesuit is like right here. It's like right in front of me, and you lose perspective on this incredible machine that we get to crawl around on the outside of. So perspective is shaped by proximity. Perspective is shaped by relationships and by experience And so this is our Soyuz crew. Again, this is 2015. We're at the departure breakfast, a big send-off from Star City as we're making our way out to the launch site. We have this departure breakfast, there's a bunch of toasting, and then as we were getting ready to leave, this is Alexei Leonov, who came up to talk to our crew as we're getting ready to depart. Alexei Leonov is one of the first people to fly in space. He's the very first person to do a spacewalk ever. He was one of basically the pillars of human spaceflight. And sadly, he's passed away recently, but he came to give us some advice as we were getting ready to fly. And so with that experience, with that known experience that he has, and with the relationship that we were able to have with him, we have access to that perspective. Perspective is shaped by expectations. And so food is really important to all of us. It's how we it's important for nutrition. We use it to celebrate, to commiserate. We were told that we were going to have, the PAO folks called us and said, hey, we'd love for you to just record a video for Thanksgiving, just celebrating, why we celebrate Thanksgiving. Go find the special food that we have for you to celebrate. And so we looked around and we could not find the special meal. And they're like, oh, sorry about that. Actually, we just want you to take food from the regular pantry and just make a Thanksgiving meal. And so this was Thanksgiving. This is smoked turkey. That's candied yams, potatoes au gratin, and corn. So this did not quite meet expectations. Our perspective, we maybe had a bad attitude, perspective. Anyway, this is part of our food. So then when you come across, so we actually really like the Russian food because it's salty and it's canned. And so this is zakuska appetitnaya, which, I mean, that sounds great. And it actually translates to appetizing appetizer. So, so that's good. So perspective can be clouded by language sometimes, and so when you don't have anything really great to eat, then you make your own food. So this is my one and only triple decker. This is from my most recent mission. This is wild rice, vegetable casserole, and grilled pork chop, all on one tortilla. And so this is fairly late at night. It was just my buddy Farmer. We were both up. He was in there, and he was taking pictures because he swears that I unhinged my jaw to and you get creative. This was strawberries on a waffle. That was one of my favorites. And of course, you need coffee. It would be a disaster up there without coffee. So perspective is also molded and shaped by the absence or presence of light. And so this is one perspective of the Middle East. You can see that we're on our way flying up over the Nile Delta, up over Israel. And so that's one look. And then the absence of light, it's completely changed. You can still make it out, it's still recognizable, and it takes on just a different characteristic. It's beautiful. It really points out the population centers, but it is altogether different and the same at the same time. The absence of light, the absence of daytime, lends itself to other different perspectives. So this is a really cool island. You can see just absolutely lit up. It looks like little towns kind of over in this area, but from this perspective, we have the absence of light, so the absence of context. And so when we add context back to this, we discover that this is actually South Korea. And this is North Korea.
Wow.
Those are fishing boats, fleets of fishing boats. And this is Pyongyang.
Wow.
And so now that opens up a tremendous perspective and reveals information on just the state of the state of living this area as compared to South America. This was a picture I took of an atoll. I thought, man, this is really cool. You've just got boats just kind of resting in this atoll. And later discovered, so very peaceful, really cool looking. This is actually a buildup of Chinese military forces in the South Pacific. And so they're militarizing atolls. These are military ships in there. And so again, with a little more information, it changes your perspective. For my most recent mission, flying over Europe, I thought, man, that's really cool. I can see the contrails of aircraft flying over. And it turns out this is actually over Ukraine. And these are probably Russian combat air patrols over Russian-held territory. So it completely changes the characteristic of things that you're looking at when you have more information, when you have context. It changes your perspective. We flew over, it was always fun to fly over the Mediterranean, to fly over the Middle East. And so this is Israel just looking straight down. And again, so proximity changes your perspective, relationships change your perspective. And so in this case, this picture, this opportunity was dramatically changed for me, knowing that Brian and everybody on the Israel trip were right up at the top of the Sea of Galilee at that point. And so I was looking down at them, knowing that they were there touring at that point. And so I took a picture of the north end of the Sea of Galilee. It turns out, though, that Brian and the group are actually down here. I saw this big mass of like, oh, this is important stuff here. It turns out it was just fields, and Capernaum is actually down in here. So still an awesome perspective. Perspective can be obscured naturally. And so this is a sandstorm in the Middle East. It can be obscured from man-made means. And so this is from my first mission, a picture of forest fires in the Northwest, started by one individual, created these raging forest fires that created smoke plumes that stretched across the entire country and ended up killing 5 firefighters. All of that context, all of that additional information changes your perspective. And so how do we experience reality? How do we experience truth? How do we pull those filters away? How do we make sure that the lenses that we're looking through are not warping our understanding and warping our view? And we know it's the Bible. So all Scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work. So my personal experience with the Bible and understanding that the Bible gives us proximity to the Creator. It gives us relationship. It gives us clarity. And we know that it is consistent and true. And my own personal experience with that was this amazing opportunity that I had to go to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, which I had worked with over the course of my mission, to meet with the folks there. And they had the Dead Sea Scroll exhibit, the traveling exhibit there at that time. And I thought that was really cool. So I rolled in there, and the very first fragment of scroll, the very first plate that I approached, happened to be this one. And so this was found in Cave 11. It's plate 976, fragment 3, and it is the song of Psalm 121, a song of ascent. And so this was actually a verse that I leaned on and that my wife sent to me prior to my very first spacewalk. And so it reads, I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. And so what was really cool was seeing that after this mission and actually having had taken that verse out with me during my spacewalk. So I carried this with me in my cuff checklist. And so the words that I had with me are the exact same words that are on that scroll written back in 1st century BC, third century BC to 1st century AD. That consistency, that truth has permeated from those very first authors to me taking that out with me on my spacewalk, which it just bent my mind when I first saw that, and I thought that was absolutely incredible. So we know that the Bible is true. We know that it provides us with a lens that we can use and trust to experience the world and to experience this absolutely amazing creation. And so I like to think that this is God's perspective of the earth. You know, he can see through it from below up, but I always imagine him looking down at us and seeing his intricate etchings on the water and in the clouds. You don't see many straight lines in nature. And so the fact that these clouds look raked, I don't know how that happens. Into the eye of a hurricane, in the desert, in dry rock, and marshy land. God uses solar particles as a paintbrush with our magnetic fields as the palette, creating aurora. And then the Milky Way beyond. And this is one of my favorite pictures from my very first mission. You can see a lightning, so watching lightning storms from orbit, just the flashes illuminating clouds below, and in this case, that's illuminating one of our solar array. And then a perspective of our home. So here's Houston. If I had a little foresight, I would have put Lake Livingston in there, but and then of our neighborhood. And so here, there's the church right there.
What's your altitude there?
So we're constantly flying at 250 miles above the earth. All this is just using cameras. Our greatest zoom lens gives us about 1,400 millimeters. So it affords us views like this. So from a kingdom perspective, an eternal perspective, we can lean on verses like this. Colossians, set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. So, I've wanted to be an astronaut for as long as I can remember. I was born in Taiwan. My father was in the Air Force, and I grew up for the most part in England. And I think that this desire to fly in space was really shaped by reading and movies, so reading science fiction. Two seminal books were The Runaway Robot and Saber Jet Ace. So I wanted to have a robot and live on Ganymede, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And those two things really formed, I think, this desire to become an astronaut. Star Wars also played a role, of course.
I like that.
But it wasn't until second grade in New Baden Elementary, Mrs. Loudon, my second grade teacher, wheeled the television into our classroom And on April 12, 1981, we watched the Space Shuttle Columbia launch. And so for me, that really solidified this desire. It gave reality to this idea of living in space. There was no internet back then, and so trying to figure out how do I make this a reality, how do I make this dream come true, I really developed that through early accounts of our early astronauts, their biographies. They were all test pilots. And so I decided, all right, I need to become a pilot and a test pilot. That is my path. And so I sent away for information from the Air Force Academy. I never heard back from them. I was 11 at the time in England, and so I think that probably had something to do with it. But I strove for that. I worked for that. I shared that desire with my parents, with my teachers, my friends, and had the great privilege of I graduated from high school in Northern Virginia, and then went to the Air Force Academy for undergrad. There, I had an epiphany about aeronautical or astronautical engineering, and that was that I did not like math. And I loved biology. I had a talent for it, and so I decided at that point to pursue biology, and really had the first inklings of maybe medicine at that point. I did pre-med at the academy. I graduated. I wanted to fly. I wanted to be a fighter pilot, but I also wanted to pursue this love that I had for biology, for physiology, and understanding the human body and how it works in weightlessness. So I deferred my pilot training slot for a few months, and went and did graduate work at Colorado State University. I got to work at NASA Ames Research Center, and so that was really a dream come true for me, but all leading back to flying. So I went to Vance Air Force Base in Enid, Oklahoma for undergraduate pilot training. And about a third of the way through, I went to the flight surgeon for what I thought was a cold. And he started tapping his chin and said, and so I knew that wasn't good. And so we spent 6 months doing some diagnostic stuff. He thought that maybe I had asthma. And I thought, that does not sound right. I really don't have any issues, but I figured, okay, we'll just let this roll and figure out, I have no concerns whatsoever about getting back into the cockpit. But I know that the Air Force is a large organization, doesn't always make decisions based on individual desires. And so I, at that point, decided, you know what, if I don't get back into the cockpit, if for some reason they won't let me fly, I want to have something that I can offer back to the Air Force. And so I started taking MCAT courses, which is the admission courses for medical school. And I started applying to medical schools. And then the Air Force came back after 6 months, and not only were they not going to let me get back into the cockpit, but they let me know that I was going to be medically discharged from the Air Force. So I appealed that. I felt a deep obligation to the Air Force for all the schooling, all the opportunities that they had afforded me. But after a lot of work, their decision was upheld, and so I was scheduled to be discharged from the Air Force in May of '98. So this is why I should not be here. For me at that time, and even now, there's no path from being medically kicked out of the service to becoming an astronaut. So that represented a complete obliteration of the plans that I had made, of this goal that had sustained my hard work. At that point, I'm 20-ish, 21-ish years old. Beyond 11. 11 is when I sent away to the Air Force Academy for information from the Air Force Academy. So a decade of work and striving completely obliterated. So that represents a descent into, for me, a valley of despair. That was really, really hard. The hardest thing in my professional life. So where do you go from there? Friends, family, but I leaned on my faith. And so, but this was a really difficult thing. Now, as I mentioned, I was pre-med, and so I decided, you know what? Medicine will challenge me as an opportunity to serve, and so that's where I set my sights. And And God's timing is amazing. The day that my pilot training class graduated was a bittersweet day. To see my friends get their wings and get their aircraft that they were going to fly was absolutely amazing, but it was difficult to see them move on to achieve that dream and to be left behind. But then the very next day, Christy, it was a Saturday, Christy and I were going to drive to Stillwater to go hang out in the coffee shop. Enid doesn't have coffee shops. And I stopped by the mailbox and I had a big packet in there from University of Colorado Medical School accepting me into the medical school class. So absolutely amazing. To accelerate things a little bit, I trained in medicine. I trained in emergency medicine after that. As a part of emergency medicine training, we have to dive in our hyperbaric chamber to take care of people who have been either poisoned by carbon monoxide or have a diving injury. And you can't go into the chamber and have asthma. And so I got tested for asthma, and they said, you don't have asthma. So I got tested several other times and really cleared of that diagnosis. So for me, that opened the door, again, to this idea of not necessarily becoming an astronaut, but participating in human spaceflight in some way. That was something that I was still very passionate about. And so after finishing up emergency medicine, I went down to UTMB in Galveston and trained, did a second residency in aerospace medicine, and subsequently got a job at Johnson Space Center as a flight surgeon, a physician that takes care of the astronauts and their crews. And I did that for 2 years. For 6 months of those 2 years, I spent living in Star City, Russia. An extraordinary experience. But in 2008, a new astronaut selection was announced, and so I applied for that. And then in 2009, So in 2009, I started astronaut candidate training. That's a 2-year program focusing on all the skills that are required to be able to fly in space, to be assigned to a mission. Robotic arm training, spacewalk training, space station systems, flying in the T-38 jet, and the bane of all of our existence, learning the Russian language. We started that on day 1. In 2013, I was assigned to a mission, and then in 2015, embarked on that mission. Leaving from Kazakhstan, from Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, I launched to the International Space Station on my first mission. So, within days of arriving on the space station, I had several revelations. One was this fulfillment of a lifelong dream of getting to fly in space. That I had made it. You know, it's amazing to have gotten to train, to be selected in the astronaut office, to have that opportunity to train for flight. But this was really the realization of this lifelong dream. And I was incredibly grateful for that. Upon further reflection, I'm even more grateful for the perspective that I gained from that. To look back at the path that I had taken, and to see, really to have the perspective, to see one of the worst days of my life, my professional life, really what I thought of as a cursed day, to be discharged from the Air Force, the life that I had known all my life, either through my dad or through my own experience. And then to recognize that as a blessing. So flipped 180 degrees, that event of being discharged from the Air Force was a blessing. It's, it's pretty profound, because as I examined, okay, what if I had stayed in pilot training? The odds of becoming an astronaut are already, it's a bad pun, but they're astronomical. You all were thinking that. I was going to say that, all right? But I was a biology major. At that point, there was really no chance I was going to go to test pilot school. I didn't have the background for it. And up until this most recent class, NASA hasn't hired pilots that don't have that test pilot background. So for my class, truly, if I had stayed in the Air Force, I would not be here. I would not have had this opportunity. And so to go through that, to have this experience, and then to look back and see really God's fingerprints on that path it's profound. And so, when I have bad days, when our family has bad days, you all have had bad days. Everybody that's come up here and talked has talked about hardship and struggle. And being a Christian doesn't mean that those go away. But to get in the Bible and to try and parse out, to find the right perspective, to use that lens to understand what it is that you're going through, and to know that there is some greater purpose for what you're going through. It's pretty amazing. So the verses that come to mind, Proverbs 16:9, the mind of a man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. And Christy, my wife, can tell you about the plans that I made. I had written on it. I was in a coffee shop studying one day, and I had written out on a napkin, I wish I had that napkin, like, okay, when I'm 21, I'm graduating from the Air Force Academy, I'm going to finish my first degree at this age. At this age, I'm going to fly, I'm going to do one tour. At this age, I'm going to go to medical school. At this age, blah, blah, blah. And she found that napkin. And she was like, so when are you planning on getting married? It's like, well, I don't know if I want to, do that first tour. I want to be married during that first tour of flying, because I think that could be really hard on the family. And she's like, So, grateful for a godly woman. Another verse that comes to mind is Genesis 50:20. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. I think about Joseph getting thrown into a pit by his brothers. Like, at what point, going into slavery, and at what point is God's plan, do you feel like you're a part of God's plan when that's happening to you? But then to be lifted up, to save a nation, that's God. Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. And then, as Bud already talked on, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. So I am grateful to have that perspective looking back on my journey to this point. So grateful that God gave me the opportunity to do this job, to have this experience, really this desire in my heart, but to sweep aside my plans and say, you know what, you're going to get to do this, but I'm going to do it in a way so that you know that I did this. So with that, let me share with you my most recent experience. So our missions start in training, and it truly takes a team at Johnson Space Center, at our partner organizations and our international partners around the world to prepare us for this mission to fly to low Earth orbit. About 1 week prior to launch, we make our way out to Kennedy Space Center to begin preparations for our flight to the International Space Station.
Crew 4 astronauts getting their spacesuits on, set to launch to the International Space Station. This is a live look inside that suit-up room where the crew of 3 Americans and 1 European astronaut are completing their checkouts. There they are. The astronauts of Crew 4 getting ready to go to space, taking their first step outside. From left to right, Jessica Watkins, Bob Hines, Kjell Lindgren,
We can count to 4. It's an amazing thing. This was very early in the morning to be escorted by security folks out to a launch pad, to see our rocket, to see our ride, standing there on the launch pad, bathed in neon lights, ready for us to get inside, strap in, and prepare for our launch to low Earth orbit.
Copy SpaceX. We'd like to take this opportunity to extend our thanks to our NASA, SpaceX, international partner teams, and most of all our families for getting us to the threshold of this amazing opportunity to launch to the International Space Station, Kennedy Space Center. Heartfelt thank you to every one of you that made this possible. Now let's rock and roar and freedom ring.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. And liftoff. Liftoff. Let's freedom ring.
So it is an absolutely amazing thing to get to ride in the rocket and to experience that flight to low Earth orbit. That is 8.5 minutes.
For joining us on
8.5 minutes to low Earth orbit.
Freedom. We enjoyed showing you around our home for the next few hours, and we're looking forward to docking with Space Station and sharing more of our work and the amazing science and research that we have the opportunity to do with you over the coming months. So thanks so much, and Crew Dragon Freedom signing off.
So 8.5 minutes to low Earth orbit, and then for us, for this trip, 17 hours to dock with the space station. We had a sleep period in there, we ate some food, and then super exciting to see the space station just magically, it seems like, floating there above the Earth's surface, and to come in and do a rendezvous with docking.
International Space Station flying 261 statute miles over the central Pacific Ocean.
Dragon hatch is open and they are welcoming the Crew 4 astronauts on board.
Call that a ballistic entry.
Bob Hines, Samantha Christopher Reddy, ingress, and last one in we see Commander of Dragon, Kjell Lindgren, now entering into the International Space Station.
So the reason that we conduct these missions, the reason we spend 6 months on the International Space Station is to conduct the science and research, to extend our presence in the solar system, but to also improve life back here on Earth. This is an incredible facility. It has been continuously occupied for over 22 years, and it is unique in that it is a multi-function facility. So most labs on the Earth will conduct one type of science. We are a multi-science facility. So here you can see Wadi working on the combustion facility. So flames in space are strange. There's no gravity-driven convection. So hot air doesn't rise. So typically, if something catches on fire, it will consume all the oxygen within its local area and then extinguish itself. And so we study that to better understand how flames propagate, to protect ourselves, but also how to use that for future technology. We did a lot of interesting kind of future payload science. That was Samantha working on a gene processor. We are the subjects for a lot of science. And so this particular project called GRIP and GRASP was better to understand how the absence of gravity affects our ability to understand where our hands in and will feed into how we use controls in long duration spaceflight. We have a regular compound microscope. Here Wadi is studying some immune cells. We also have a scanning electron microscope about the size of a toaster. I don't know if any of you have ever worked with one of those. When I was in medical school, that occupied the size of a room. And we've got one just kind of Velcroed to the wall in the space station right now. It's kind of crazy. Here I'm preparing the experiment airlock. Samantha's bringing in the slide rack. We're going to attach a payload, basically a satellite launcher to this rack, and then we're going to push it, depress the hatch and depress the airlock, and now push that slide outside so that a robotic arm can pick up this satellite launcher, and we can use it to actually launch small university or small commercial satellites. We use the space station as a test bed. In here, this is a small satellite attitude control system that's being tested. We also have these cool robots called astrobees, where universities on the ground can build code to fly these around inside the space station, and they'll actually track each other and then map the interior of the module and fly around. We did, one of my favorite experiments from last time was called Veggie. We grew red romaine lettuce, and this time we grew plants using aeroponics and hydroponics. And we grew carrots and peas and tomatoes. Here's some more lettuce. And that was really, I think, one of my favorite experiments, getting to tend to these living, growing things within the vehicle, and really being a part of future long duration spaceflight. The idea that we might be able to sustainably grow crops for food, and also to participate in our environmental control system with plants basically harvesting carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. As I said, we're subjects for our own science, so we drew a lot of our own blood. We had to collect urine and feces, and so you get very familiar with your bodily processes up there. That all gets stowed into this freezer, which then will go onto cargo vehicles, so we'll bring them back down to the Earth for further study. We had the privilege of seeing a number of different cargo vehicles and different vehicles visit the space station. On the left is a Cygnus orbital vehicle. In the middle is a Russian Progress cargo vehicle, and on the right is a SpaceX Cargo Dragon spacecraft. And so those we have regular visits from cargo vehicles that keep the space station resupplied with gases, food, equipment, and research materials. So the first vehicle was a SpaceX Cargo Dragon. That arrival represents a really busy time in our lives, because we have to pack all of the stuff in that vehicle, find a place for it in the space station. Much of it has science that has to be done within the month that vehicle's on orbit. But a lot of times it'll bring great stuff up, like fresh food and other treats and care packages from home. Once the vehicle is empty, then we start to load it with stuff that's going back to Earth. The Cargo Dragon will actually re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and come down under parachutes and is recoverable. And so we're gonna take a lot of those samples that we had stowed, we're gonna load those along with other equipment back into this cargo dragon. It's gonna depart and then return softly to the Earth's surface so that all that equipment can be retrieved, and if it needs to be renovated for future use, and all of those experimental samples then can be retrieved and processed for the scientific work that we're doing. The other vehicle, cargo vehicle that the U.S. uses is called the Cygnus. It's launched by Northrop Grumman. Instead of docking by itself to the space station, it actually will come up, fly about 10 meters away, and we'll use the robotic arm to reach out and grab it, and then attach it to the space station. It was already on board when we arrived, and so what you saw there was basically we were packing it with trash. And our crew has the record for the most trash packed into a Cygnus in the entire space station program. We're very proud of that. We were scrambling around the space station, like emptying all the trash cans. It was awesome. We threw everything that we could away. This will actually destructively re-enter. So this is how we get rid of trash. It flies off, it enters the Earth's atmosphere, and will actually burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. It is essentially a man-made meteorite. And as like my youngest son likes to say, one man's shooting star is another man's dirty underwear. So be careful what you wish upon. During our mission, we had the great privilege of welcoming the OFT-2 mission. So this is the other commercial crew spacecraft that we were developing to carry astronauts to and from the space station. We flew on a SpaceX Crew Dragon. This is a Boeing Starliner. And so they're still in the test phase, but this represented a successful unmanned test flight to the space station. It launched, came up, parked in front of the space station, did all of its tests, and then ultimately docked.
PMA-2, which is where the docking adapters are on the very front of space station, and now you're entering into Starliner. So welcome to Starliner for the very first time ever in space, and Rosie the Rocketeer is sitting over in the commander's seat, along with her zero-G indicator, Jebediah Kerpel.
And then, unfortunately, during our mission, our spacesuits were broken. So the spacewalk prior to our arrival, we had water leak into the spacesuit. You can imagine that that is not a good thing. You could essentially drown in a couple of cups of water if your spacesuit floods like that. And so we needed to make sure that the spacesuits were, we had to conduct an investigation on the ground. And so our spacesuits were not available for spacewalks during our mission. However, Samantha, one of my ESA colleagues and a member of Crew 4, had trained with the Russians and got to do a Russian spacewalk in an Orlan spacesuit, which is really, really cool. She did not get to do a spacewalk during her first flight, and so this represented really a dream come true for her. Seeing spacewalk training really come to fruition. So we were excited to celebrate that work with her, both before, during, and after her spacewalk. In addition to being our office, our laboratory, the space station is also our home, and so we like to have a little bit of fun. Here's Samantha being Wonder Woman. Wadi's doing her best version of Spider-Woman. Farmer as Superman. This is me as Wonder Woman in my invisible jet. The human brain is absolutely amazing, that we can adapt within minutes to hours of being in this novel, weightless environment, and just come to accept that this is how you move around in the space station. You adapt to it, you normalize to it, but it never stops being fun, just being able to float around like that. We get to see fundamental physics at work, to see when you squirt out some water, to see that glob into a sphere. And then to do fun things like blowing a bubble inside of a water bubble. We are, of course, surrounded on 6 sides by electronics, so we do try to be very conscientious about not having water going everywhere. We never mess with each other. It's funny the first time. It's definitely funny the second time.
It's like a
Somehow we came up with a game called Shell Ball. So in addition to having fun, we spend 2.5 hours every day exercising. We use a treadmill, a bicycle, a cycle ergometer, and then also a device called the ARED, the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, to provide the countermeasures to make sure that we are healthy so that we can come home in good shape. And so the treadmill and that bicycle, the cycle ergometer, provide us with good aerobic exercise to maintain cardiovascular fitness. And then we have this ARED, the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, provides up to 600 pounds of resistance through evacuated cylinders. We can reconfigure it to do a whole number of exercises. We really focus on those core exercises to maintain bone density and to maintain muscle strength. So that when we get home, most of us, if not all of us, are actually in better shape than when we left. I'm making a birthday cake here using known ingredients for Wadi. She celebrated her birthday within days of arriving on orbit. And so we used maple muffin tops, fruit, and vanilla pudding to make a little cake for her. And like I said, food is incredibly important. It's a time to gather, to celebrate, to commiserate. And here we're having a pizza night on a Friday night together. The space station is an incredible platform. I've already showed you some pictures, but it is unique in the ability to look back at the Earth.
Circular feature, which I believe are the Pinnaconte Peaks. Got them, yeah, I've got the target in sight.
So Wadi is a geologist by training, so it was amazing to have her as a resource and a reference for what we were looking back at the Earth. So we conduct research looking back at the Earth. We help with weather, and we are members of the International Disaster Charter. And so when there are events on the Earth like flooding, or like the earthquake in Turkey and Syria, we will often be recruited to take photos of affected areas so that can be used basically on the ground to help understand the extent of the devastation and how rescuers and resources can be best used to help. But the cupola, the 7-bay window where we like to hang out, is also just an amazing place for reflection and just looking back at this beautiful place that we call home. And whether you're looking at the same place over and over, it is always different. The lighting, the seasons, the weather is always different, and it's always beautiful. And then looking out at the stars is also incredible. You can see the Milky Way. Those are the Pleiades. Like I said, thunderstorms from orbit is just one of my absolute favorite things to watch. We also flew at a time of increased solar activity. And again, those emitted solar particles interacting with our magnetosphere create the aurora. And I know that there were a lot of folks on the ground that were enjoying the aurora at much southerly altitudes than usual. But for us, it meant that on just about every pass going through the northern hemisphere, we had these amazing meandering bands of neon green with highlights of pink and purple. It is one of the few things that has given me goosebumps looking out of the space station. That also may be because of the increased radiation, but we'll just say it was beautiful.
Is that actual speed?
These are not actual speed. Yeah, these are all time lapses, and so they're sped up as a result. Our video cameras can't capture this, the light at those low levels, so we have to use still cameras. So at the end of 170 days, our mission came to an end, and that's a bittersweet time. You have been in an environment that will never be replicated. With that crew complement, with the work and mission that you had to do, you'll never experience that again. And it is something that you've been working your entire career to do. And so saying goodbye to that is tough, but we've also been away from our families for almost 6 months, and so we're eager to get home. And so we all donned our spacesuits, we got into our spacecraft, and our particular phasing permitted about a 4.5 hour return to the Earth, which was pretty extraordinary. We do a deorbit burn, which slows the vehicle down. It causes it to start to dip into the Earth's atmosphere, and we really use the Earth's atmosphere to help us slow down. We need to go from 17,500 miles an hour to 0. And so we use the Earth to help us, that atmosphere to slow us down. At a certain altitude, we put out our drogue chutes and then our main parachutes, and I can tell you that there is very little that is more beautiful than 4 big parachutes when you're hurtling towards the Earth. Our spaceship got rigged within about 5 to 10 minutes. We were pulled onto the recovery boat within about 35 minutes. And opening that hatch and smelling that fresh air was just, it was absolutely amazing. We got pulled out, moved into a medical bay. They got us out of our spacesuits. We did some quick medical checks. We were transferred onto a waiting helicopter and then flown to a local airport, to Jacksonville Airport, where we did some more data collection. And then they loaded us onto a NASA jet, which then flew us to Ellington Field, just north of the Johnson Space Center. So within 6 hours of landing back on the Earth, we were back home with our family and friends. All right, so thank you for going through that journey with me.
Thank you, sir.